Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. A happy new year to you as you're listening to this. Mark and I are recording this in the morning of January 1. We are in 2025. It will probably take, I don't know, 2 or 3 months for me to stop writing 2024 on things.
Yeah.
So, that's just part of the deal. But happy holidays, happy new year, whatever you celebrate. It's been if you're watching the video version of this show, you can see that I am doing the old parents' basement. I'm a stereotype,
Yeah.
the
The
podcaster
blogger.
and
Yeah.
blogger, podcaster, and parents' basement. So that's where I still am for the holidays. Getting ready to go to ABCA here tomorrow. Looking forward to that. We'll have some content around ABCA at SEC Extra and also at D1 Baseball more broadly, especially if we have legislative news. You never really know. Some years we do, some years we don't. But we don't really know until we get there. So
Right.
we'll be on top of it one way or the other. Today, Mark and I are going to do a New Year's resolution show. What are the resolutions for all 16? Remember, 16 now SEC teams. So we're going to run through those. But first off, Mark, I trust that you sufficiently partied hard last night.
Tore it up.
And so
Yeah.
Mark is really like, this is a Jordan flu game situation
Oh
where
yeah.
he's fighting.
Fighting.
Fighting for
Grinding. Yeah.
actually
That's it.
in all seriousness, Mark has a new puppy in his house, so he
hmm
actually is kind of fighting through some things. But
Fireworks were not, he was not a fan. I mean, he was under the bed. He was shaking. He wouldn't go out to pee. I mean, all of these things that are really important to puppies, right? When you're
yeah,
trying to get them trained, it really messed up his routine. He's really cute though. He's a golden doodle. And
oh
so
yeah,
when he gets that pouty look,
yeah. The
hard to
the
deal
eyes
with
on
him.
the
Yeah,
eyes on the golden doodle are hard to say no to.
yeah.
For sure. All right, Mark. So let's get down to business here.
Mhm.
Let's talk New Year's resolutions. Neither of us are big resolutions folks. I'm sure some others are. That's great. To each their own. But we're going to pretend as if these 16 SEC teams are looking to have some New Year's resolutions. So Mark has taken what we used to call the SEC East plus Oklahoma. I have the SEC West, or what used to be the SEC West, plus Texas, and we're going to kind of ping pong back and forth, the format that we do here a decent bit on the show. I'm going to let Mark bat lead off here.
Yeah.
Start wherever you want, Mark, whatever order you want. I don't know what order I'm going to go in, frankly. So go ahead and get us started and give us a resolution.
Well, I think first off, what I want to do is
Mm.
is from an SEC extra standpoint.
Oh,
Uh, here's my resolution that
yeah,
that
let's
I'd
hear
like
it.
to do.
Let's
Uh,
hear it.
you know how we did the weekend dish and the midweek dish last year? What I'm resolving to do, and this is kind of a stretch goal, is I'm going to try to do that every day. Okay,
Mm.
so each day throughout the season, we'll react, we'll give our takeaways, we'll give whatever's kind of the pressing story in the sport and in the league, and do that every day throughout the season and see where that takes us. But I'm really excited about that. Um,
As am I.
yeah,
Looking forward to it. And for the listeners, he said it was a stretch goal. Also, if there's a day when Mark just can't do it, he can't do it. That's
yeah.
just what it is.
I mean,
Um,
it's ambitious. I mean, it's every day, and
yeah.
people get sick, people have life
Oh yeah.
happens, right? So, but
Mark has children in his house,
yeah,
so
yeah. I do think though that'll be a great kind of a great forum because a lot of times through the year things happen and you don't. It's not really worth a story,
yeah,
but it's worth giving your opinion or just relaying the news. And this would be it's daily, so it was given an
yeah,
opportunity to do that. And with 16 teams in the league, there's a lot of news to talk about. So
yeah.
with that, I'm thinking that's going to be
Well,
a
I also
great
think
resolution.
as social media continues to splinter, right?
hmm
I think there's also value in that. Like if you're a listener listening to this and whether you're on Twitter or maybe you've moved over to Blue Sky or maybe you were never on either of those, right? Maybe
hmm
you're Facebook or whatever. Like, that might be something that normally if Mark and I were power social media users, neither of us
hmm
are,
Right.
that we would put on social media. But even if we were power users, we'd have to put it on 4 or 5 different social media places for everyone to see it. This gives you a place a centralized place to go for that kind of stuff, which I think is valuable in a world where we're just no longer on the same social media apps
Right.
together anymore. The way, 10 years ago, everybody was on Twitter.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So
Hmm.
anyway, all right.
Yeah. So since I've got the East, I'll start with Florida. Uh, Florida's resolution should be for consistency. Okay, this was a team that last year, when they were at their best, they were as good as anybody in the country, and you saw that at the end of the year. They made the Final Four, the whole thing, right? But through the year, they had highs and they had lows, and it was what you didn't know what to expect when Florida rolled into town. And I do think that's something since they have they're one of the more experienced teams returning because they played so many young guys last year, so many who weren't draft eligible. That's the advantage of having an older team that's played together, right? You should be more consistent, and you should be able to reach your ceiling more often than a team that maybe is more thrown together. So for Florida, for me, that's what they should want to see is just a more consistent approach throughout the season.
I think that's a good one. You're so right. Last year, it was every weekend you just didn't know.
Hmm.
Like you knew they were extremely talented. On any given weekend they could beat anybody in the country. But then there were also weekends where you just weren't sure why it wasn't working.
Hmm.
They got to figure it out just in time. But yeah, consistency would be much appreciated in Gainesville, I'm certain.
Hmm.
I guess I'll just start at the top of the alphabet here with Alabama.
Yeah.
My New Year's resolution is for them to make friends at the batting cage, because the portal thing for them has worked. I don't
Hmm.
think you can argue against it. But when you are going heavily on the portal, it kind of perpetuates itself, and you end up having to do that repeatedly. And I know at some point Rob Vaughn and his staff would like to get off that treadmill, I'm sure. But for this year, it's another heavy portal year in the lineup. Pitching staff a little bit different. That's why I said make friends at the batting cage. But they're going to have to become a cohesive team pretty quickly because, as we know, you get 4 weeks, then you're the SECs in your face, and once you start playing SEC games, you kind of got to have your stuff figured out pretty quick.
Hmm.
So they've pulled it off. I mean, last year I guess they were just okay. 13 and
Right.
17 regular season, make a regional, don't really do anything in the regional.
And I went too.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so they've made it work, but can they be more than they were last year with a heavily portaled team? We're going to find out. And so I would suggest they get to know each other real fast around the batting cage as practice opens up here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's a good call, and it's similar to where I'm going next with Georgia. Because speaking of the portal, nobody's hit the portal like the Bulldogs have, and I do think the resolution for them is okay. They've got to put egos aside, and they've got to mesh and be a team, right? So it's the resolution is to enhance your teamwork skills, because so many of these guys have been so successful elsewhere, and they're coming in and they're going to have to fight for a position because there's not enough room for all of these quote impact transfers to play, at least not play regularly. So how do you handle that? Can in this age where everybody is really out for number one, how do you mesh that into a cohesive unit and reach your common goals? Because they all want to win. The question is, what's your day-to-day approach to get there? And I think that is that unselfishness. That's what it's going to take for Georgia to make it back to Omaha.
Yeah, such a good call. I'm fascinated by that team. I've said it before, but unless something changes last minute, I think I'm going to see Georgia opening weekend in
Yeah.
Wilmington. Why the heck not? It's an hour and a half from my
Hmm.
house. I just can't wait to see it. So looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I'll go into LSU. Their resolution is just be yourself, because I don't know if it was pressure from coming off the national title last year, just the roster turnover, whatever it was. But it's always tough to come off of a national title team, and it just didn't click at first. Now that they got there, by the time they were in a regional, they were as dangerous as anybody. There were a lot of
Yeah.
regionals they would have won. It just so happened that North Carolina was also one of the best handful of
Yeah.
teams in the country. So they just got a tough draw there, but they've just moved through a lot of generational talent. in Baton Rouge the last couple of years, and it can be tough when you're coming into that to think that I've got to be the next Dylan Cruz, I've got to be the next Tommy White, I've got to be the next Paul Skeens. I'm at LSU, I've got to, and this has been happening for centuries. People trying to be the next Brandon Larson, for example. But just be yourself. You're at LSU for a reason. Like Jay Johnson would not have you on the roster if he didn't think you could win a national title. So just be yourself. Focus on being the best LSU Tiger you can be. Don't worry about following in the footsteps of these guys that have come through the program that obviously won a national title, but also are some of the best players in the history of college baseball in some cases, particularly in the case of Cruz and Skeens. So just be yourself. You're good enough. And if you're good enough, that'll be enough when you're at LSU. So just be yourself, Tigers.
Okay, that's good advice. I'm going to go to Kentucky next, and with the Wildcats, embrace that chip on your shoulder. I mean, this has been a team that has been, we'll just say, under-evaluated the last couple of years, and boy, have they come out and had great seasons. And you know what's going to happen this year, based on how many people they've lost? I mean, they tied for the SEC regular season title, and when the preseason rankings come out, they're going to be picked closer to the bottom than the top. Okay, based on how much attrition they've had. So, that's a powerful motivator. Hey, those guys at D1, the coaches poll, whoever, they don't believe in us. So we're going to show them. We're going to bring all these new pieces together, and kind of like we talked about with Georgia, the sum of the parts are going to come in and elevate the program, because I mean, this is a program with a lot of momentum at this point. Went to the College World Series for the first time. There's a lot of positives with it, and you definitely don't want to have that huge step back. You're probably going to have a step back based on how difficult this league is, but how far that falls is going to depend on how the players embrace their, we'll call it, lower expectations for 2025.
Such a good point, because they are going to be shorted in the preseason,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, and I understand why. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. If I was making a pecking order, I'd probably have them lower. Sorry, Wildcats, but it's funny, if it had been most any other SEC team coming off of a super regional followed by a College World Series, even with losing a lot of guys on both sides of the ball, like there still would be an element of like benefit of the doubt, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with Kentucky, the history suggests that they're just not going to get that benefit of the doubt, and we'll find out who's right and who's wrong. But certainly, I am going to be uncomfortable doubting Kentucky now,
Yeah, right.
just given what we've seen from them. So it's been a fun ride, certainly. So that's a really good one there. Uh, I moved to Arkansas, and it's
Yeah.
I'm gonna use a phrase that my mom used to use when I was growing up, and that's "eat your Wheaties," because we've beaten this dead horse for a while, but it's really no secret that like Arkansas in this SEC, like you've got to be physical, and the physicality just hasn't been there from top to bottom in their lineup. And I look at what they have going into 2025, and I'm intrigued. Ryder Helfrich had a big summer on the Cape, tied for the league lead in home runs. Cam Kojal has some physicality.
Yeah.
Nolan Souza, I think, has a chance to be that kind of bat. Brent Iredale, certainly,
Yeah.
the Australian junior college transfer. So I think there's a chance this breaks that cycle for Arkansas.
Yeah.
But regardless, one way or another, they're going to have to be able to fight fire with fire. And the beauty of it is, with their pitching staff, if that goes the way that we think it could go and that they're hoping it goes, they're not going to have to be 2024 Tennessee in terms of physicality. But if they're kind of a similar offense to what they've been the last couple of years, the pitching staff, it's going to put a little bit of strain on the pitching staff, because they're going to have to be a little more fine than I think they're going to want to have to be during the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good call. I mean, this is going to be arguably the best pitching staff in the country. They're going to be up there. So you don't have to be great on offense, but you do have to be able to be good enough to keep pace in a league that's become so offensive and so power heavy. Um, Next up for me, I'm going to go to Mizzou. I mean, you the resolution there is to be more offensive. It was, I mean, the pitching was good enough last year, kept them in games, and a lot of times it was better than good enough. If they'd have had much offense at all, I mean, this is a team that probably makes a regional, and everyone's going to pick them 16th out of 16. I mean, anyone who's watching it, and rightfully so, based on the roster composition as we know it. Something tells me they won't finish last. I do think that they're going to find a way to win games. I mean, think about it. The last couple of years, you had they swept Tennessee at home 2 years ago. They swept Florida at home. These were College World Series teams. They knocked them out of hosting by sweeping them. And I do think that this is the kind of club. They're gritty. They're going to play aggressive. They're going to put pressure on pitchers and defenses. They can be really, really pesky. And I do think that if they can just get a little bit more thump, so you're not having to manufacture everything, you do get some 3-run bombs to help you out, then this is a team that's going to surprise.
I agree. I was there for the Florida sweep last year. I just happened to be like, it was one of
Mhm.
the, a lot of good stories came out of that weekend that I wrote, and so like I'm thankful I was there. It just happened to be the weekend I was in Columbia, but um, score and run just felt so tough.
Yeah.
Even in a series they swept, it was just like single sack bunt,
Mhm.
E5
Right.
sack fly, just like to score one run.
Yeah.
Just yeah. So while I was particular about how I'd like to see Arkansas score runs with
Mhm.
Mizzou, it's just like whatever it takes,
Yeah.
just score more
Right.
runs. Like that's the long and the short of it. Let's see. I'm going to move on to Texas A&M. Obviously, a lot of expectations. I anticipate them being our preseason number one. I don't think this is going to be an issue, but just in case, I'm going to make it their resolution. Don't take anything for granted. Long as the history of number one teams going into a season and it just not quite clicking right away, and part of that is because of a hyped level of expectation. Let's be honest. I remember 2023 LSU and all the expectations they had going into the season, and then when they didn't look like the best team that's ever taken the field in the history of
Yeah.
baseball, people were like, "Wow, what's wrong with LSU?" And the answer was nothing.
Mhm.
But we were just looking for something magic to happen,
You
right?
nitpick. Right. You
Yeah,
nitpick.
exactly. Exactly. So it's don't take anything for granted. It's also just like as long as you're winning games, don't worry about how it looks. Um, there's just going to be such a high level of expectation. I don't anticipate this team taking things for granted, but that's going to be kind of important because yes, they are the best roster in the SEC in my opinion. But once they get an SEC play, it's not as if their roster is so much better than everyone else's that they can just kind of waltz through. That's obviously not a realistic situation. So don't take anything for granted. Come in there and understand you still have to earn wins in this league.
Mhm. Good call. For me, I'm going to go to Oklahoma. New league. This is a team or program that won the Big 12 last year, coming in with, you know, a lot of confidence, but they lost a ton offensively. So their resolution is going to be to lean on that pitching staff because it has some elite arms on it. I do think that when you have a mostly rebuilt lineup, it's going to take some time typically to gel. And you've got elite arms like the Witherspoon brothers, Cam Johnson. Those you can match up with anybody, and they can carry you, uh, deep into games, deep into the season. And I think that's going to be the formula because um, no offense to the Big 12, but they're going to go into some venues that are different, that really get on you, and having, that's for me, the best way to quiet a home crowd is to have that ace out there who just shuts them down and limits base runners, limits opportunities, and Oklahoma's got that, and I think that's the key for them this year. I think they'll eventually score. There's enough newcomer talent. The offense will round into form, but early on, especially, I think leaning on the pitching is the formula.
Yeah, I mean, just a staggering. I sometimes forget just this staggering amount of talent they have on the mound.
Hmm.
And I tend to focus on kind of like, oh, Cam Johnson, man, if they can get him straightened out. But then I forget, oh, like Kyson Witherspoon was already one of the best pitchers in the
Yeah,
country, and
right.
Malachi is just about as talented. So,
Hmm.
yeah, crazy, crazy, crazy.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Ole Miss, and the resolution is as simple as get moving. Like I think there's something to it's going to be a new team in a lot of ways. I think that's good coming off of. That's no disrespect to anybody who was on last year's team. I just think a reset is good after a season like they had. Um, and whether it almost doesn't even matter the opponent early on. It's just get back to winning games, get back to feeling good about yourself in the program. Um, you know, we can sort out exactly where in the SEC pecking order you are. You just need to get moving and start feeling good about the way things are heading. So, because last year things just ended on such a sour note. The second half of last year, where we just saw where things were going,
Hmm.
and it felt like a foregone conclusion. So, um, reversing that trend is going to be important early on for them.
Yeah, that's a good call. I mean, that's a fascinating program because they do have some returnees on the mound who pitched in big games and had been through the wars. I mean, if you've got a strong rotation, a lot of times the rest can take care of itself. At least make you competitive every time out. And if they're competitive every time out, that's a regional team. So
Yeah, I guess my other resolution for them too is don't read too much into opening weekend, because
mhm,
they've got a tough opening
yeah,
weekend where they
brutal.
get Arizona, Texas, and Clemson, and it's like, you could go 1-2 or even 0-3 and still feel pretty good about it.
Yeah,
So don't let opening weekend be the be all end all. Like, yes, it's important to look the part there, but don't focus on the record there that opening weekend. Focus more on, do we feel like we're close against these teams that we're going to see.
yeah, that's a good call. Next for me is South Carolina, and what they need this year is to lay the foundation. Okay, so what is your identity going to be under Paul Maneri? The man has won everywhere he's been. Um, the question is now this league is as tough as it's ever been. But South Carolina has proven this is a program that can win. It's not you're one of the halves. So if so, what does that look like? How do you get to where you want to be? And that's what I want to see from them. Are they going to be a big offensive club? Are they going to be more aggressive on the bases? Are they going to be a pitching heavy club? And again, your first year you don't really know, right? It's all based on who you have returning, but you're laying that foundation of what kind of program you want to be. And I think that for me is going to be fascinating to see because it's a team. They've got some players, but they're like we talked about with Kentucky. They're going to be picked kind of lower in in the preseason rankings. um, how do they handle that? How do they elevate? How do they get to to where this program expects to be, which is competing for a national title?
Good call. Another fascinating team, a team that just any number of outcomes is in the realm of
Hmm.
possibility. Definitely. I've got Texas next, and my resolution there is kind of that trope about prison, where when you get there, you want to take on the biggest, baddest guy.
Yeah,
Because let's be honest, Oklahoma and Texas are in the same boat in that they are moving from the Big 12 to the SEC, and they're going to see more raucous venues from week to week, that the level of talent is going to be slightly elevated, all of that stuff. But it's different in that, let's be honest, Texas is going to have a target on its back more so than Oklahoma
sure.
because it's Texas. And so every SEC team is going to want to, send a message to Texas and say, hey, welcome to the SEC. Don't let the door hit you on the way out of town. Um, and that's just going to be, I think, the way that they're approached during the season.
Yeah.
So if you're Texas, I think you have to be ready for, and it was this way in the Big 12, but again, it's a tougher league. It's going to be 10 weeks of getting everyone's best shot, I think, especially when you go on the road. So Texas needs to be ready to punch back and prove that it's tough enough, talented enough, which it is talented enough. There's no doubt about that. But prove that it's tough and talented enough to punch back when it gets punched in the mouth, out in the yard, if you will. So
Hmm.
it's just going to be important that they send a message back to the rest of the SEC that they're ready for this.
I do think it's fascinating that, with the Oklahoma coaching staff, they they haven't been in the SEC before, where Texas, the majority of the
Yeah.
staff was at A&M last year. So
Yep.
they know the venues, they know, the week in, week out, what to expect. How is that an advantage, or or is this just something media talks about, right?
Yep. Yep.
I do think that'll be an interesting storyline there.
Yeah.
For me, let's talk about the champs. When you're looking at, the Tennessee, it's how do you handle success? Okay, everybody loves the climb, and then once you get to the top, it's really hard to stay there. Okay, so lost a lot of great players off last year's team. Uh, the program is one of the programs of recruiting at a high level. They get they brought in some great impact players from the portal. They're developing players. Check, check, check. Right. So how do you sustain that once you've reached that top level? And I'm not betting against Tony. I mean, he's done an incredible job since you get there. But this is a different kind of challenge than, once you've already reached that pinnacle. What's next? Right? And doing it again sometimes isn't as appealing as trying to do it that first time. So that'll be just a fascinating story of how do you handle success, how do you stay hungry, how do you continue to move on to be the program that we all expect it to be.
That is interesting. Something I hadn't really thought much about, this that program has, since Tony has been there, has been so much about first changing the narrative around Tennessee baseball and getting things head in the right direction. But then it was about us against the world,
Hmm.
and then climbing the mountain and proving that all of that, whether you loved it or hate it, like all of that was worth it because it paid off with a national title.
And you're not the
Okay,
underdog anymore.
right? Like exactly, the dog has caught the car,
Yeah.
and they have the trophy to show for it. And so now what's next, right?
Hmm.
That is fascinating. I really hadn't thought much about that, but that is an interesting storyline as we go into the season. I'm going to go with Auburn here, and
Hmm.
it's trust yourself,
Yeah.
because last year stunk, right? Like, uh, it was a tough year, but like that happens. Like, every program in the SEC, without exception, has had seasons where it's just like, well, didn't go our way, and that was last season for Auburn. But it doesn't mean that anything larger is wrong here. Um, I, I don't think there needs to be any big picture doubt about the direction, that the coaching staff, the health of the program. If anything, I think they're in a better spot because they're getting the renovations done to Plainsman,
Oh
like
yeah.
all that stuff. Um, so just trust yourself. This program is in good hands. It's being run in a good way. So look, whether or not on the field it's good enough in 2025 remains to be seen. We'll find out. But but if it doesn't go well, it's not necessarily because something is rotten there. It's just that can happen in the SEC. So go out there and trust yourself and understand that you don't have to change who or what you are just because last season didn't go well.
Yeah. And Auburn's a team that I mean, that freshman class is
Very, very
going to
good.
be a huge part of their success going forward. Is how quickly can they grow up?
Right.
Right. Certainly talented, and if if they're precocious, if they're ready to go, then this is a team that's going to be back in the postseason. So,
Yep. Agreed.
for me, I've got Vandy left. So Vandy is kind of interesting for me. Is uh, what what are they going to look like? You know, after having this is the third straight year that they did not make it to the College World Series. So, what is their identity now? Um, they were a team that they had some physicality, but not as physical as the top in the conference. They had some really good power arms, but maybe not as much as some of the other ones. They were just kind of they played good defense, not exceptional, right? They were just kind of okay, and as a result, we got to the postseason and haven't been able to break through. So what I want to see for them is how can they What's their identity? What can they be exceptional at? And just be, if they just maintain the status quo in the other areas and they elevate, whether it's offensively with a freshman like Johnston, or whether it's, one of these arms, just it really clicks for them and they've got one of the top pitchers in the conference. Um, or maybe it's just an aggressive approach that they're able to manufacture runs, like Kentucky was able to do, and really make that your identity. What is it that's going to make Vanderbilt stand out? So find your strength and lean into it, and that's what I want to see from Vandy. And one, identify it, but two, because you can't be the best at everything, but what can you be exceptional at? And I think that's how they get back to where we expect Vanderbilt to be.
Yeah, that's a good call. I'm endlessly fascinated by that as well. Side note, you mentioned Brody Johnston.
Hmm.
Um, this is not happening inside the program necessarily, but I know from outsiders like us, we're all looking at Brody Johnston and it feels like we're putting a lot on him
Yeah.
being like really good really soon. But I mean, based on what we saw in the Appalachian League, based on what I heard from the fall, like
Yeah.
that might not be misplaced confidence.
I mean,
you
he
know,
could be this year's Grahovic, right? Who comes in
sure,
and
yeah,
and doesn't look like a freshman and is a physical
right,
player, and plays a huge role in the team's offense.
yeah, yeah, very well could be, absolutely. My last team is Mississippi State, and the resolution is simple: keep moving forward, don't backslide.
Hmm.
Because we've talked about it on this podcast a bunch, but last year was great. I think there's, as Chris Lemonis said when we interviewed him a couple weeks ago, they had a very good case to host. They're to use his words, pissed off that they did not host. So last year was great. They made some huge strides. They got things moving back in the right direction. But buddy, if you lose a game to Manhattan in the first
Yeah.
weekend of the season, like the whole conversation is going to change. And I don't anticipate they will lose a game to Manhattan. But my point being, actually, a better example is probably Missouri State second week, because
Hmm.
Missouri State actually is talented enough to
Yeah.
like to win a game there, right? Um, but if you don't sweep Missouri State, whether or not you should sweep Missouri State, whatever, it's just going to be a different conversation, because that's the nature of
Yeah.
Starkville and Mississippi State. It's just part of the deal. It's part of what makes that program great, but it's also part of what makes that program a pressure cooker, right?
Yeah.
So, they're not going. A backslide will not be tolerated. I guess I'll
Right.
put it that way.
Yeah. Well, certainly Lamonis went into the season on the hot seat last year. I mean, that was pretty well documented, and to have that success and have that while making it, being the 17th host when there's only 16 teams. Um, that might sound good, but to the home teams, well, we didn't get there, and that's what we really wanted, was to have the big party at the end of May, early June, and I do think that uh, he's in a position where he can build on that success, like you said, and take that next step and get that one or two extra wins, right? That gets it done. But if he doesn't, then we're having all these uncomfortable conversations again, and I think that if it's another pivotal year, and you hate to say it like that, but I do think that it's just the nature of that job where it's at right now. That the fans are still in kind of a prove it to me, whether that's fair or not.
Right. Yeah, precisely. You brought it up in one of our internal chats with D1 that, you know, hosting just means something different in Starkville. And so,
Yeah.
to your point, last year being team number 17, um, he isn't even if even if they had won a road regional in Charlottesville,
Hmm.
there would still be some element of like, yeah, but you didn't host,
Right.
like just
Hmm.
because it is such a party there, and it's such an event to host in Starkville, and it should be, like, obviously, like,
Yeah.
nowhere hosts like Starkville does, right? So,
It's a hell of a party.
right, exactly. So, so I get it, but all of that leads to the standard is just impossibly high, and Chris Lemonis knows that, the team knows that. Like, we're not telling any secrets here, but it does mean that you can't have like last year where you lose back-to-back games to Austin P. Even though Austin P turned out to be pretty doggone good,
Hmm.
it's just the optics of it, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we'll see, but obviously any early setbacks are not going to be great.
Yeah, and the margins are so small that you never know what game is going to end up being the deciding point.
Yep, exactly. All right, Mark. Well, that's an episode. I feel like we've given a lot of good advice. Surely, SEC coaches are listening to this with rapt attention.
Yeah, taking notes. Yeah.
Exactly, taking notes, making sure they have it all down. Quick programming note before we close out here. Preview stuff is happening. Checks watch pretty soon.
Yeah.
So Mark and I talked about it a little bit before we started recording. Within the
Couple
next, as
weeks.
you listen to
Yeah.
this, within the next within the window of the next 2 weeks, we'll have preview content out. So what does that mean? A lot of written stuff. Mark does schedule analyses. I do breakout players to watch. Mark and I collaborate on a bigger piece that kind of touches on storylines and things like that. We'll have that for all 16 SEC teams. So at a bare minimum, for each SEC team, you'll have 3 written pieces. You'll have a preview podcast on that specific team. And then, of course, we throw in a bunch of other odds and ends as the season goes on. Also, we'll do a standard just on the main site. It won't be written by me or Mark. It'll be written by Kendall or Aaron, most likely, but a full SEC preview, a proper, honest to God, conference preview
Hmm.
will exist out there as well. So you will be well taken care of on that front. And that preview content will start hitting your hitting the website, hitting your email inbox, however you receive our content here over the next couple weeks. Mark and I are excited for a lot of reasons, not least of which is we're excited to actually talk about things that some concrete things as opposed to just like speculating on what might happen or what needs to happen or what did happen or all of
Right.
those things. So looking forward to shifting gears now that 2025 is here. That is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Want to thank Mark for joining me as always. Want to thank you, the listener, for listening.